Welcome to the College Knowledge Podcast, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. Whether you're searching for that right fit college, applying to college, or figuring out how you're going to afford it all, you're in the right place. You'll hear from deans, admissions counselors, student athletes, and scholars from esteemed universities and colleges around the country. We'll dig deep to uncover their insight and unique experiences. So whether you're a student gearing up for college or a parent with college-bound kids, sit back, relax, and listen. Like you, we have lots of questions. Our guests have the answers, and we're excited to share them with you. Let's get started.
Welcome back, everyone, to another special Christmas episode of College Knowledge. We did have technically our season finale last week, but let's throw in a special Christmas episode like the used to see at the end of a DVD, like the bonus section. That's what we're going to get through today. And I was feeling jolly and wanted to give back to our listeners. As you can see, I'm dressed for the occasion today. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening, I look good. So fine, look at me on YouTube. But I wanted to give back. And with, hearing Christmas music, I heard the 12 Days of Christmas and said, why not say, hey, let's take 12 Days of Christmas. Why don't I take 12 questions that you guys have sent in, that our followers on social media, listening to our podcast have sent in, they want some answers to. So I went through, sifted through about over 500 questions that we received in the past month or so. Picked out the ones that I would say are typically the most frequently asked. Also, I thought there was a couple really good ones that maybe not everyone has thought about. But the honest truth is that you've probably asked yourself these questions, or you're asking someone else and maybe you haven't gotten the answer yet. So figure I would give back 12 Days of Christmas, 12 questions, special Christmas episode of College Knowledge. And we'll get into it. Now, I did say there was a lot of questions I went through. There was a ton, I would say more than half. All started with the words, what should I do? And I can tell you, I can't answer those questions in a podcast episode. If you have a question that starts with that, hey, Joe, what should I do with this? Or should I do that? Or should I do that? I highly recommend. The true answer is that there's a lot of other questions that we would have to ask before giving you the proper answer. So definitely, if that's where you're at, go on over to elitecollegiateplanning.com, schedule a free consultation with one of our education consultants, and they'll have a one-on-one discussion with you to see where exactly you're at and probably, hopefully, be able to answer that type of question. So definitely do that, because these questions, again, it's a lot of college-bound or parents of college-bound students that are asking very similar questions. So these are the ones that I want to tackle, a little bit more general in nature about the process, financial aid, FAFSA. So that's what I figured I would get into. So I think number one, this was a big one for me. So question number one on the first day of Christmas, parents are asking, what are the biggest mistakes that parents make when completing the FAFSA? So this is a great question, because there are mistakes that can be made, and it can cause you to lose eligibility for financial aid. I would say, there's the simple things like making sure dates of birth and social security numbers are correct. Believe it or not, one of the easy things that you have to do, I say easy because it's, not complicated questions, but you have to create something called an FSA ID, and it's one parent and the student need to create that in order to file the FAFSA online. And some parents go through the FAFSA, they try to save it, they get to the end, they don't realize they have an FSA ID. It takes a couple of days for it to be verified by the Social Security Administration. And then they go back in and realize they forgot their save key, or now they have to start all over again. So make sure you create the FSA ID before you fill it out. But when it comes to mistakes, honestly, it's usually with assets that are the biggest mistake that I see. And probably number one on that list is including retirement assets on the FAFSA. You do not have to include the balance of your 401k, your IRA, your 403b, your pension. And because it does get a little tricky, they ask, what does mom and dad have in cash, savings, and money market? And then what do you have in investments? You do have to include that. So, non-retirement accounts. So again, if you know what the word qualified or non-qualified means, basically, has that money been taxed yet? Right? Would determine really if you have to put that on the FAFSA. So do not put retirement accounts on there, because it's just going to decrease the amount of aid that you are saying you're eligible for. But that is without a doubt probably the biggest mistake that I see. All right. So on the second day of Christmas, we had a parent ask, is there an income limit above which obtaining financial aid is unlikely? What is the income limit where filing the FAFSA is a waste of time? And is FAFSA required to be filed to be awarded merit scholarships at schools? So this question came in from Jason. Thanks, Jason, for the question. Three-parter, but they kind of almost answer themselves. The reality is that to file the FAFSA, there is no such thing as an income limit. There are income limits on certain grants that the government may give, but there's really not an income limit on what schools can give out. And you actually asked a great question here, that there are some schools that will not award merit-based scholarship unless the FAFSA is filed. I actually know some schools that give merit-based money just because you file the FAFSA, right? 100% of the kids that file the FAFSA actually get a couple $1,000s off. So the reality is the FAFSA is never a waste of time. You should fill it out 100% of the time, every single year your kid's in school, regardless if you get no aid, if all you're offered is a direct government loan. You should still always take it. You should still always file it. Whether you take the loan is up to you. But a couple of reasons why is, number one, we talked about the merit-based side. You can still qualify for merit-based scholarships, even if your income is extremely high. So make sure you fill it out. Some schools will not allow you to try and negotiate maybe what one school gave as an offer versus another if you don't send them your financial picture, which is the FAFSA. And lastly, you never know what could happen over time, right? You might be in a great financial position today, but maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, you might not be in the same one. And if the pandemic taught us anything, nothing's for certain. There were people that had great jobs in 2019 that may have lost them in 2020. And if you didn't fill out the FAFSA 2018, 2019, and then you're looking for help, the schools are basically going to say, well, you didn't ask for help in the years past. There's maybe not a whole lot that we can do. So you don't want to lose the ability to potentially put yourself in a worse situation if things don't go the right way. So fill it out every year. Definitely, I don't think there's any good reason to not complete that FAFSA. On the third day of Christmas, someone asked us about 529s. What are the pros and cons? We did a whole episode on this a few weeks back. I would highly recommend, if you're interested in 529s, take a listen to that episode, because Dave and I really dove in on how they work, what the good sides are, what the bad sides are. The reality is there's pros and cons to every financial vehicle that's out there. 529s can be the best financial vehicle for college for one family and the worst for another. It really depends on your unique situation. The pros, hey, this money grows, right? You put after-tax money in, it grows tax deferred. And if you use it for college expenses, right, you don't pay taxes on the gains. That's the pro of them. The cons, it does count in the financial aid formula. So it can limit potentially, depending on how much you have. 529s, it's not about who the student is the beneficiary. You don't have to list the student that's the beneficiary. You have to list all of the 529 accounts. So I have 3 kids. If I have 3 different 529s when my oldest goes to school, I have to list the account balances of even the 2 younger kids. So you have to understand that as well. But honestly, I say the biggest con that exists right now with 529s, and again, take a listen to that episode, but it's misunderstood. And most families just put money into a 529, and then it comes time to pay for college. And unfortunately, they might have enough to pay for 1 year, but no plan to pay for years 2, 3, and 4. So it's a vehicle. It's not always a solution. It may be a vehicle that's used in a solution for some families. It may be a vehicle that needs to be avoided for others. There's definitely pros and cons, just like every other potential strategy that's out there. You just need to know your specific situation and say, okay, what is the best way for you specifically to pay for college? But 529s in general, there's good things and there's bad things, right? And there's multiple 529s that exist too. So again, to get more in depth on that answer, highly suggest go listen to episode. I think it was like 3 weeks ago. So I think if we're at 90, well, I don't know if this will have a specific number to it because it's the Christmas episode, the Christmas special, but I want to say it was probably like 87, something like that. Now, another question came in, and this was actually one that came in more than I thought it would, because there was a lot of confusion after filing the FAFSA. So we're on the 4th day of Christmas, by the way. The student aid reward, or the student aid report, SAR. People are looking to see how much money they're going to get and why it doesn't show on the student aid website. So what happens is when you submit the FAFSA, right, it gets processed. It basically gets sent to the schools that you listed. Then you're able to go on to that same website and see what's called your student aid report. And really, that just shows you what your EFC was calculated to be and all the answers to the questions that you submitted. Okay, so it doesn't tell you what you're going to get from every school, right? It doesn't tell you any type of financial aid that you're going to get because every school has a different cost of attendance. Schools cost different amounts for their tuition, their room and board, their fees, their books, their transportation costs. So essentially what the FAFSA is doing is essentially saying this is a number that your family can afford for 1 year of college. That number, right? If the cost of a school is higher than that number, you have a financial need and now you're eligible for aid. So the student aid report is not going to tell you how much money you're eligible for, what you're going to get. That's going to come from what's called an award letter. And that comes from the colleges themselves. So you have to apply to a school, you have to get accepted. And then after you're accepted, you'll get an award letter, very itemized. It'll say, this is what my cost of tuition, fees, books, room, board, everything. And then this is the financial aid that you're being offered. Okay. So step one is you fill this out. The student aid report is more of just a summary of what you already submitted. It doesn't actually show you what you're going to get. That comes specifically from the schools a little bit later on in the process. Okay. A lot of questions on the fifth day of Christmas came from divorced families because when it comes to financial aid, it can be very confusing. I can't get into all of it. I know we're probably going to have an episode specifically on this category in the season 2 when it comes along. But you have to understand that for the FAFSA, it's right now the way that the system works is that the one parent has to fill out their income and assets. That's what the financial aid is going to be based off of, one parent. That parent is known as the custodial parent. And right now, if the law doesn't change, if the FAFSA formula doesn't change, it's who the student lives with more than 50% of the time the past 12 months. That's it. Okay. So you have a student that lives with mom or dad, right? More than 50% of the time, that's the parent. That is known as the custodial parent, and it's their income and assets that go on to the FAFSA. Now, if that parent is remarried, the new spouse's income and assets also come into that equation. The additional form that you need to know about is that formula with only one parent only exists with the FAFSA, because an additional form that exists is called the CSS profile. It's done through the College Board website. They will ask for the non-custodial parent information as well. Okay. And that again can now mean that there's more income and assets that come into the picture. Those schools are going to give out more money on a financial need based type of grants and scholarships. So they are going to want to look at the full picture. So they will ask for both the custodial parent and the non-custodial parent. And again, schools do things, every school does things a little bit different than other schools that are out there, and the same exists in their financial aid process. Some schools will take non-custodial information as if the parents aren't divorced. Some schools will treat it a little bit differently. So you still have to go through the process, but understand, again, it's one parent, and that parent's the custodial parent for the FAFSA, potentially with the CSS profile. It's going to be both parents that are involved. All right, let's keep moving along here. All right, on the 6th day of Christmas, a parent said to me, I think that's how I should do it now. Just on the 6th day of Christmas, a parent said to me, at what age should I start looking at a college? All right. Can you look at prices with the colleges early? There's a lot of different ways to answer this question. But the reason I brought this one up is because, we always say you plan early, you pay less. I say you should start looking at colleges, as early as, 8th grade, 9th grade. And not necessarily in the way that you might say looking at colleges of this is where I want to go to school, but just starting to understand what a college campus is, what it looks like. If there's a college campus near your house, go and visit it just to see what the experience may be. You may not apply to that school, but you can start to look at things and say, hey, I really don't like that. Or that's something I really like. And then as you continue the journey, maybe a year or two later, you can start to add more things and say, okay, well, What am I going to pursue as a career? What am I going to have to study as a major? You can start to get more specific, because ultimately we here always want the students to find a school where you have 3 fits to find that best fit school. And it's a social fit, an academic fit, and a financial fit, right? That is the key to successful college planning and finding the best fit school. One that truly is the best fit for you from a social environment, from a demographic of how far away from home, the class size, the size of the campus, an academic fit being, how do those schools teach? Are you somebody that learns hands-on, but you're going to be in a lecture hall with 300 other students? You have to match those things up, and obviously you have to be able to afford it. So the earlier you start, the more I think effort and time is available to research to really find those schools that are a good fit. So I usually say earlier is better, right? And you can at least start having conversations. But I would say really, come sophomore year, after sophomore year is over, you really start to need to have this pretty significant, cast a wide net. And then as time goes on, you're going to narrow that down over time. But if you start too late, if you end up starting, the summer of senior year, there's just not enough time to truly find those schools that would be the right social, academic, and financial fit. So you have to start looking a little early. And with the price, yes, you can. It doesn't mean that it's going to be what the price is 3-4 years from now, but you can, in fact, do a calculation. Again, you can come talk to us at Elite Collegiate Planning. You can schedule a meeting right on our website, elitecollegiateplanning.com. And we can actually say, well, if your kid was going to school today, this is what they would ask you to pay, right? So you can really kind of gauge on where you're at from a financial aid standpoint, what schools give, and kind of narrow down, maybe, hey, there are some schools that truly are unaffordable. So let's look at the schools that are. So finding that financial fit, you can start that process very early, no matter where you're at, just to get an understanding of how the formula would be applied to your specific situation. But obviously that could change over time for better or worse. But you can get a pretty good estimate earlier on. All right. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this. I'm having fun. It's always a little bit different when it's just you in front of the camera. And Dave's out today. He's under the weather, so we hope he feels better for Christmas. All right. On the 7th day of Christmas, Mom and Dad said to me, hey, can 2 people in the family get financial aid within a year of each other? And I'm about to say, yeah, of course. But then the next question was, in the case of a mother and her son. So I wanted to highlight this one because a lot of questions that we get are, well, what do you do with multiple kids in school, and how does the financial aid system work? So there are, again, 2 different formulas that are involved with that FAFSA or the CSS profile. When it comes to 2 kids in school at the same time, there is a significant increase in the amount of aid that the family's eligible for. It doesn't always mean that both kids get it. Sometimes it's only the younger student that kind of benefits from that. So if you have twins, yes, the students can definitely get in there. But the reason I brought this question up is because the question ended up with is mom and her son. Now, both of those in that situation could qualify for aid, but the formula is different, right? The student doesn't get any type of a discount. It doesn't get an increase in aid eligibility because mom is going to college. That only accounts for when there's like 2 dependents at the same time. The FAFSA does not take into account, that there would be money or, there's a younger child that you may have to save for. It's only when 2 kids are in school at the same time. The CSS profile does take that into account. So again, you could have 2 different formulas with the same exact numbers, but just having a younger child, maybe somebody who's in 7th grade and you have a high school junior, all of a sudden the FAFSA is going to stay the same number until 2 kids are in school at the same time, where the CSS profile would actually be a little bit lower potentially, just because they do some more allowances in that world. So mom going to school doesn't increase any aid, but mom, you're still eligible for your own aid from school, and your child would be eligible for aid at the same time. Now, that, and along with the question prior from yesterday, the 5th day of Christmas, with the FAFSA, there are a lot of potential changes on the horizon. Clay Kovach and myself did an episode on some of the drafts that came out with the new FAFSA, the new law, the FAFSA Simplification Act. Some of these things that I'm telling you today, again, I'm saying this is how the system is today. It may change. right? And that whole 2 kids in school at the same time is one of the things that FAFSA is going to do away with. Luckily, the CSS profile is not. At least that's what they say right now. I've heard multiple sources and multiple schools say that they're not going to change that just because the FAFSA does. So again, if you're worried about some changes on the horizon, you're going to have multiple kids in school, make sure you give that episode a listen because that may answer some questions as well about some of these changes. All right. This is one we're getting a lot right now. What are some of the differences in early decision, early action, and regular decision, and how do we decide? So first off, let me explain what these 3 different types of applications are. Number 1, early decision is basically what's known as a binding contract. You can only apply to one school early decision because if that school accepts you, you have to go there, right? You're already committed to going to that school. So you can only do that to one school because you can't commit to more than one school. Okay. Early action is a non-binding agreement, meaning you get your application in earlier than typical. Usually it's November 1st, but you always want to check the deadlines. Every school has their own deadlines for that. You have to get financial aid paperwork, potentially all those forms, CSS profile, FAFSA. You may have to get those in earlier. But essays, letters of recommendation, transcripts, they all have earlier deadlines. And in the college world, guys, I can tell you this, deadlines are not recommendations, they're requirements. So if you want to do early action or early decision, make sure you know the dates and get everything in at that time. Now, regular decision it's a little bit later as far as deadlines go, but essentially the differences between those 3 is when you find out if you've been accepted to a school, right? Early decision and early action, usually you will find out, before January. Typically. Regular decision, you may not find out until March, right? And again, every school is a little bit different. Some schools also have what's called rolling admission, where they basically start accepting kids as early as August, right, of senior year before the fall year of high school even starts. So some schools also have something called rolling admission. Now, if you do early action or regular decision, you do not have to commit to a school until May 1st. Okay, so you might find out in December you've been accepted, but you don't have to let the school know if you're decided to go there or not until May 1st. That's basically the commitment deadline that you have to let a school know. Now, the biggest difference between these 3 different types of decisions, right? Regular decision, early decision, or early action. My advice is really always comes down to a financial side of things. I usually recommend that if a school offers early action, there's really not a downside to doing it. Okay. You're not committed to going there. You're not binding, but you are showing the school you want to get that you're very interested in them. You're going to get things in earlier. So put in the effort and the time to make sure you hit those deadlines. But I really like when my students apply early action. Early decision, not so much. Mainly because what you are telling the school is if you accept me, I'm signing on the dotted line to come to you, but I still don't know what the price is. I don't know what I'm going to have to pay. Now, early decision does increase the chances of being accepted, but it could come at financial detriment. So the only time that I truly recommend applying early decision is when a family and a student have a number 1 school. It's where they would want to go. If they get accepted everywhere else, it doesn't matter. That's where they're going. And they're ready to pay top dollar, basically almost the full cost of attendance to attend that school. That's the only time that I think early decision is appropriate, just because a school may say, hey, you can afford $30,000 based on our calculations, right? Through the FAFSA, through the CSS Pro, but we're going to ask you to pay $60,000 per year. And it's really hard to get out of that situation because technically you've already committed to that school. So not a position that you want to be in trying to get out of an early decision. It doesn't always work out well. Very rarely do I see people benefit, honestly, from early decision. I've seen it lead to more problems than, we'll say, good news in the long run. So that obviously is a big one that comes across a lot. Because again, even making a mistake and not knowing how it goes. I had a mom that came to me and said, my son applied early decision. I didn't know about it. And now all of a sudden they're looking at a $50,000 bill and they don't know what to do. So you have to make sure the students and parents know the differences between these different types of applications. All right. I'm hoping I didn't lose count. I think I'm on the right day here. So, and I'm liking how maybe we'll turn this into a song. No. Now, on the 9th day of Christmas, a father said to me, Joe, does the timeline for accepting an admissions offer affect the chances of getting financial aid? And I'm hoping that this is how John, who wrote this question, and thanks, John, was asking that. So I found out I've been accepted in December, right? But when I actually commit to that school, does that affect how much financial aid I'll get? And that's how I'm going to answer it, because in my opinion, the answer is yes, right? Because you might get accepted November, December, January, but you would not get a financial award letter until potentially March. So not only may you know, hey, great, I got into school, but I don't know if it's affordable yet. Well, if you tell a school in December that you're coming without knowing any type of financial aid that they're going to offer you, schools are run like businesses, so they probably don't have to offer you as much, right? Because they got you, right? They already know that you're committed to coming to the school, so they don't have to offer a whole lot of financial aid. So usually I say you don't want to commit to a school until you have all the cards on the table. You know what the costs are going to be. You know what other schools are offering you from financial aid standpoint, so you can make a good informed decision, but even technically be able to go back to a school and do potentially what's called an appeal. And I'm not saying you always do it, right? That's part of the thing that we advise our families on, is when to appeal and when not to, because you potentially can lose financial aid in an appeal. So you don't just want to go haphazardly and appeal every financial award, but you also don't want to commit to a school too early, because you kind of lose the ability to leverage or negotiate with the school before you know what you got. So from a timing perspective, yeah, you do want to wait. Now, if you already got your financial award letter, then basically if you don't appeal, then there's, hey, if you're ready to go to that school, you like the award, you're not necessarily going to get anything more or less. They've already made the offer to you. So I'm reading into this question, basically a family gets an acceptance notice in November or December, and they're saying, should I commit, right? Will that limit the amount of aid that they give you? And my answer is potentially yes. So I usually say wait, and schools are great at pressuring kids. And hey, if you want priority dorm seating or a parking spot, if you want this, you want that, you have to commit, You're going to lose these things, but you still don't know what type of aid you're going to get. So it's typically, again, it is a case by case basis, but ultimately my back of the envelope advice there is just make sure, I say, have all the cards on the table before you make a decision. So don't commit to a school too early. All right. The 10th day of Christmas, a great question came to me. How do you really find scholarships for schools? And I can tell you, if it wasn't about, hey, how do I do this or how should I do that? Without a doubt, FAFSA and scholarships are the majority of questions that come our way. Now, I'll tell you that when it comes to scholarships, grants and scholarships, known as gift aid, money that never has to be paid back, right? It's a straight discount for a year of school. The biggest source of that money comes from schools themselves. It's known as institutional money. Right? It's about 55% of when you add up all of the gift aid that was given out, each year. It's more than half of all of it. $140 billion. More than half of that is money that came directly from the schools. And so how you really get scholarships is you try to maximize as much of that money as you possibly can. How you maximize that is, number one, you have to understand how each school individually, right, that are on your child's list gives out money, right? Are they someone that gives out more in need-based aid? Are they someone that gives out more money on merit-based side of things? You need to know what your expected family contribution is to know if you're eligible for the need-based money. And then do schools actually give money to families that have financial need or not? So that's part of, understanding the formula and understanding how the system works. That's number one, how you're going to maximize the most money. But usually when people ask me this, it's on the private scholarship side of things. Let me fix my Santa hat here. And the private scholarships are, I would say there's a lot of myths around them. But I usually see the best scholarships and where families typically benefit the most from private scholarships. Number one is actually employers, right? So mom and dad, go to your employer and see if they offer scholarships for your students. I've seen very successful cases where that has happened. And also if the kids are working, make sure that they go to their employers. I had 3 students this year that won scholarships that work at Chick-fil-A, Wegmans, Giant, and they got, they got a couple $1,000s. So definitely go to their employers. Go to your guidance counselor at high school and ask them who won private scholarships last year. How did they get them? can my son or daughter qualify for what someone else won last year? And the last piece, the great website, fastweb.com, is a great source. You basically create a little profile on there on the student. And from there, you'll see what scholarships they potentially are eligible for. You'll see some ones that are $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, no essay required. When I read this question, how do you really find those are ones that are, I wouldn't really consider them real scholarships, right? It's more the ones that are more specific on who is eligible for those. So if you're a female that's looking to study STEM, you live on the East Coast and you have red hair, right? There's a scholarship out there for you and you can find it on that website, FastWeb. But usually those scholarships are, I'll say $500 to maybe $2,000, but they're only good for 1 year. They're not automatically renewable. So again, when you look for those scholarships, realize the biggest source is the schools, right? That's the number. That's where you really want money to come from. But if you're looking for outside scholarships or private, a couple different places you can go, but those usually are not the solution. It doesn't cover the full cost of college, right? It can help, but it's not going to be the solution. So just make sure you're aware of what that means. So yeah, how do you really find scholarships? Well, there's some work you have to do, but the biggest source of scholarships is knowing the system and looking at schools that you're going to be awarded money. So school choice is how I would answer that when you say, how do you really find scholarships? It comes down to school choice is really how that works out. All right, rolling along. We're almost done. On the 11th day of Christmas, just like the song, it just keeps dragging on and on and on. Is there a strategy for high income earners and small business owners to deal with profits and business assets to help lower the EFC? Yeah, and there was a lot of questions that came in. Can you lower your EFC? So the reality is that, if you've already filed the FAFSA, you probably can't necessarily lower the EFC. But that's where we talk about, you plan early, you pay less. You do have to realize how the formula works and what assets count into the formula and which ones don't, right? But you also have to play and understand, this is what we do day in and day out, is the positioning of assets also has to line up with having money that's liquid to pay the bill for college when it comes, to have a plan on, well, if I put money somewhere, do I need that to buy the vacation home that I want in a couple of years, or put in the pool, or buy a car? Or does this line up with my retirement goals? So there are things that people can do strategically to potentially decrease that EFC number and increase the amount of aid that they're eligible for and potentially lower the cost of college without a doubt. But there's not a cookie cutter approach to say, well, this is how you do it, right? It's definitely a one-on-one, a very unique situation. Every family that's out there, even though you might have these same questions, same concerns, your solutions to the problems that you may be facing are going to be very, very different, right? So the question here is, yes, there's definitely ways to lower it. And on top of that, when you're a high income earner, it depends, right? When you're a business owner, definitely, but you have to plan, I would say, even earlier in the process. And that actually will go into our next question, which kind of lined up, and I did these two back to back instead of making it a two-parter. So I guess we stayed up all night and just went right into day 11 to day 12, right? We pulled an all-nighter. So the 12th day of Christmas, how do I do things in my child's junior year from a tax perspective to keep the EFC low? So again, this ties into the previous question with, business owner, and understand how when you fill out those financial aid forms, the FAFSA, the CSS profile, they're going to be looking at income and assets. Now, the income and the assets, right? Assets are going to be assessed at the time that you submit those forms, right? So those forms open October of senior year. So if you fill those forms out on October 15th, it's what your assets are, what's in your checking, your savings, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, what the value is at that day. That's your assets. Now, the income is going to come from the previous year's tax return. Okay. And this is something we try to explain. It's called prior. So if your son or daughter is going to graduate in 2024, okay, that means that come the October of 2023 is when you're going to fill out these forms using 2022's tax returns. So in other words, 2 years before graduation is the tax year that is used. So if you graduate in 23, you're going to use 21. If you graduate in 24, you're going to use 22. If you graduate in 25, You use 23's tax returns. So you have to understand that, especially with a business owner, you have to be able to plan and have a plan, right? And a strategy to keep maybe potentially those expenses, profits, and different things that you can do at a low time. But that time starts January 1st of sophomore year of high school, because that's the tax year that'll start. So it does start earlier than you may think. All right. And again, plan early, pay less. This is definitely part of that reason. So when the last question came in about what can I do in the junior year, the reality is, from a tax perspective, you're actually already too late. From an income standpoint, you're almost too late. You have to really, the tax strategies have to be very more proactive. So you need to do things prior to January 1st of sophomore year, so that when that whole year happens, you've already done things, you're doing things in that year that'll have a positive effect down the road. And the last piece of that I always like to highlight is, you don't want to do anything that's going to have the negative effect. You don't want to be cashing money out of a pension, out of an IRA in that January 1st, sophomore year, December 31st of junior year, right? You really want to make sure you don't do anything that would increase your adjusted gross income in that year, because again, that's the tax year they're going to use. That's the tax return that they'll see a couple years down the road. And if your adjusted gross income is higher, your EFC is going to be higher, which means you're going to limit the amount of aid that you're eligible for. So yeah, please make sure that you're aware of the timing of that when it comes to income. But if you're interested in ways of lowering that EFC, again, guys, if that's a question you're asking, definitely come and talk to us, because the honest answer is there may not be a way to do it. But if there are, you probably want to know about those. And that's where we do some of the things that we discuss in that free consultation with our education consultant. So if you're asking yourself that question, visit elitecollegiateplanning.com, schedule a visit, come and talk to us, and we'll gladly explain how it'll pertain to your situation. I got through the 12 days. I'm not going to count them backwards and answer all the questions again or keep repeating things. But I was happy to do this today. Again, I just wanted to take, we get so many questions all the time, and I figured why not try to at least maybe answer some of these for you. Call it the special Christmas episode. So I had fun doing this, and hopefully this was educational for you guys. Maybe you get to listen to this over Christmas break or everything that's there. So from all of us here at College Knowledge, we just want to wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas and a wonderful, Happy New Year.
Thanks for listening to the College Knowledge Podcast with your hosts, Dave Kozak and Joe Kearns. We hope you enjoyed this week's exploration of higher education, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. That's all for this episode. See you next time.